Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Digital Banter. I know those that listen to us a bunch, you have heard our journey through various episodes, some of which James and I vent real hard about attribution and the challenges related to that, and how do you measure true performance and impact of your marketing dollars. Well, we made the step and actually decided to bring on a guest who's going to talk to that at length a little bit more deliberately today, because that's what he does. That's what he's done for his career, and he actually founded a company that focuses on specializing in those areas. So I want to introduce Drew Smith, the founder and CEO of Attributa. Drew, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Really glad to be on the podcast here.
Yeah. So Attributa, just to kind of give the short version here, is a marketing consultancy that specializes in solving marketing attribution and rev ops challenges for brands. Drew, CEO to CEO, what drove you to found Attributa?
Yeah, I've worked in marketing ops and rev ops agencies and consultancies for the last almost 8 years, and at the agencies I've been at, I've always been the marketing attribution guy. And what I kind of realized is that there's a lot of consultancies or agencies out there that'll tell you that they do marketing attribution, but it's always a secondary, tertiary, or whatever the hell comes after tertiary focus for them, which means that they do it, but they don't really do it well. And with attribution, there's such a demand for it, and so many people have challenges in it that I figured, there's this little tiny niche, and I mean by niche, I mean like a paper thin sliver in the world where there's no consultancies that are focused on it. So I said, hey, let's fill that paper thin niche with a company that focuses in it, and hope to really just help solve challenges and help marketing orgs figure out which 50% of their budget is going to waste, and which 50% of their budget is not going to waste.
So I've got to say, because coming from the paid media side, I feel like this is something that hits home to me, as far as there only being a sliver of the population who really understands attribution and kind of is able to do it successfully. I know on our end, whenever most situations we run into, it's a mess. They're trying to come up with a single source of truth. They're trying to come up with one single system that works. Like, what have you seen on your end? Sounds like you've probably seen a lot more than I have even.
Oh yeah. I mean, the demand for it is there. These organizations are just begging for help in these areas, because there are so few people that know how to do this. I mean, I just went through and went through a hiring process to hire my first new teammate, and nobody, I mean, I can't hire somebody that already has the experience. I have to train for it. So it's the companies are just dying for this. And particularly as you're going into a recession, what are the first questions that get asked by CEOs is, where are we spending our marketing budget, and what is it returning? Because they're looking to start cutting budgets. So, if you're a marketing organization that can't answer that question, which by the way means you're in like the 98% of marketing organizations that can't answer that question, you have no way of defending your budget. And so CMOs right now are just completely under the gun trying to find ways to justify their budget. And there's no help. There's so few places to turn to actually get help in figuring out how to do this, that, I think there's, that's why I started the business.
So just to get this, I feel like to level set a little bit, because attribution is also I feel like a word that has its own spectrum, right? There are companies who are using Google Analytics as their single source of truth for everything. There's HubSpot. There's the attribution tools that you work with. What in your mind is, I guess, give the definition of attribution and kind of what that tool set entails?
Yeah, I mean, I think the definition of attribution is just understanding the outcome of our marketing efforts. And because you're right, attribution is a spectrum. There's There's first touch, there's multi-touch, there's last touch, there's, so you start with just single touch, which is first touch or last touch, which most organizations do some sort of single touch. I wouldn't say that most organizations do it well, but they do some sort of single touch. Getting to multi-touch is where it becomes really difficult, because you have your systems like HubSpot and Marketo and Salesforce and Pardot that have some multi-touch capabilities. But what always ends up happening is when you start on the multi-touch capabilities of those platforms, you will very, very quickly, and when I mean very quickly, I mean almost as soon as you start, you exhaust the capabilities of those systems, and you find all the gaps and all of the challenges that those systems don't address. And that's really where the real marketing attribution journey starts, because it's so easy to start using the multi-touch capabilities in those platforms, but it's so difficult to know where to go once you see the gaps and the weaknesses of the attribution capabilities in those platforms. It's just like, well, what do I do now? I started, but I've got all these gaps. I've got all these problems that these platforms just aren't solving. And now I don't know where to go. And that's really where that journey starts, is knowing where to go when those platforms exhaust their capabilities.
From what you've seen, is there like an aha moment that makes either the brand stakeholder or just the individual that comes to realization that the tech stack that I have doesn't suffice to what I actually need?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of aha moments. I mean, the first aha moment is just when you see the amount of manual effort that you have to do to kind of, even when you're using these platforms, the amount of manual effort you have to do to stitch things together and create, any kind of data set that does the attribution. And the first thing that folks say when they see that is there's got to be an easier way. The one thing that jumps out at me is that I actually call this very specifically the gateway drug to true multi-touch attribution, is the Salesforce campaign influence. So campaign influence, most people that have a cursory understanding of Salesforce on the administrative side understand campaign influence and how it works. You become a member of a campaign. When you reach the responded status, then Salesforce associates that campaign to opportunities and it says that campaign influenced an opportunity. That's the basics of it, right? The problem is when you do that, Salesforce basically gives 100% of the opportunity's credit to every single campaign that influenced the opportunity. So you run your report and you're like, oh, this campaign drove, $2.5 million in opportunities. That's cool. And then you look at it and it's like, oh, wait, this opportunity is referenced across all 6 of these campaigns at its full value. So now I have to manually deduplicate that almost. And so, and then you just, in any CEO or CFO or sales leader that sees marketing reporting on campaign influence is going to look at that and go, that's bullshit. I mean, pardon the language, but it is. So that's just, everybody's going to look at that and think that's crap. And so that's when marketers are like, okay, well, we've got to do better, but I don't know where to go.
So this is interesting because this is a problem that we run into all the time. And the question then becomes, because really what you were describing there is at the basic level, a linear attribution model where everything's getting the same amount of attribution.
Yep.
We have first touch, we have last touch, we have curve, there's like 50 different attribution models that you can choose from, which when you have a lot of options leads you to the question, like, what is the right one? And that's the question that we get all the time that, I feel like this is a baiting question because I'm not sure if there really is an answer to it, but, how do you approach that conversation?
Yeah. So, there's a ton of different attribution models out there, like you said, and then there's the ability to do custom attribution models. So what do we do? What do I do for my business? What's the right one for my business? And the answer is there isn't a right one for your business. The answer is the attribution models are right for the specific report that you're creating. So I look at attribution models as tools in a tool set. It's no different than a wrench. You buy a set of wrenches, you get 10 wrenches that fit different size nuts and bolts, right? And when you are, working on a project, let's say you're working on a car, anything you're doing in the car, you're going to encounter 2, 3, 4 different size nuts and bolts. And so you need your entire tool set. You need all your wrenches to make sure that you get the right tool set, that you can fit on that nut or bolt and actually, do the work you need to do. So attribution models are not designed to be, this is the attribution model that my company uses. They're designed to best fit the purpose of the report that I'm building in that moment. So the example that I always use is, one of the platforms out there that everybody knows is Marketo Measure, used to be Visible. They have a W-shaped attribution model, and the W-shaped attribution model, basically there's 3 milestones at the top of the W: first touch, lead creation, opportunity creation. And then the 2 points at the bottom is all the middle touches that fit in between those milestones. Excuse me. And so the key about that attribution model, though, is that it stops when the opportunity is created. So if I'm trying to create a report that's telling me how marketing influenced pipeline or opportunity value creation, I don't want to use an attribution model that includes marketing activities that hit between opportunity creation and opportunity closure, because those things happen after the opportunity was created. I have to use a model that stops at opportunity creation. So I want to use that W-shaped model because that makes sure that the marketing engagements happen at the right point in the funnel for the report that I'm trying to create. It doesn't mean that I use W-shaped attribution model all the time, because if I'm reporting on deals, closed won opportunities, and marketing has the ability to influence, post opportunity creation, well, I don't want to stop my attribution model when the opportunity is created. I want to include all the marketing engagements that happen between opportunity creation and opportunity closure. So I use a different model for that. So the models are best fit for the reports that you're building, not best fit for your business.
It's funny. This is super interesting because in the circumstance you described there's everything that leads up to opportunity creation, everything that happens after that. Us coming from really the paid media side more than anything, we're still in a world where like lead gen, whether it's demo, trial, bottom of the funnel stuff, is where opportunities are created. And that's where, we fall in this like first touch, last touch thing, like what made them hear about us and what made them actually submit the information. And the system that you're describing has also the stuff that happens after that, which I honestly feel like a lot of people ignore.
Oh yeah.
Like, the nurturing that takes place, the LNS systems that are in place, basically everything else.
Yep.
And it's shocking, honestly, how many, and maybe it's just the angle that we're coming from, but how many marketers are just missing that whole back half of the scenario. They just want to know how the contact was created, and then a sales problem at that point.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. And it's when you start down this journey, you not only see that marketers are missing that picture from an attribution standpoint, but you also start to see that there's so many marketing departments that are missing that picture from a marketing strategy standpoint. I have conversations with clients all the time when we're going through this process and we're building reports using the attribution platform they just implemented. And we're looking at, should we include marketing engagements that happened after the opportunity was created, or should we exclude that? And my question is always, well, what's your intentional marketing motion post opportunity creation? And most marketers go, we don't have one. So what they're saying is they don't have a marketing strategy for people that are in pipeline. It's just sales does what they do. And, if somebody comes to the website to download a piece of content, that's great. but like marketing's not targeting those folks with an actual intentional motion. So attribution not only serves to help you understand the results of marketing, but it also helps you understand where you have strategy gaps. Are we not nurturing people post lead creation? Are we not recycling people? Are we not helping with pipeline deals? Where are we actually servicing the funnel from a marketing strategy standpoint, and where do we have opportunities to grow?
It's funny because the biggest thing buzz in B2B marketing for the last 2 years is like ABM, ABM, ABM. That's what everybody talks about, and it's like that's not even part of the ABM strategy in most of these scenarios.
No. Most marketing organizations that are doing ABM are still doing ABM from a standpoint of lead gen and right. Demand gen. They are not doing ABM from a standpoint of full funnel marketing. They're looking at it just from a standpoint of how do I get the leads in the door that are from Apple and Microsoft and Meta and Alphabet. I want those leads. How do I find those leads? Marketing, even with ABM, marketing is still very much lead focused and not revenue focused.
Definitely see that.
I think the other thing that comes into play then too is, in that ABM mentality, right? The touches and things like that, it applies to the same aspect of demand gen and lead gen, right? So the whole, you talk about buzzworthy topics, James, right? The self-reported attribution buzz conversation. Drew, I'm kind of curious, what's your take on self-reported attribution and that feeding into kind of the models that you just described, but ultimately, the marketing conversations and perceptions that exist out there as it relates to that?
Yeah, there's some very, very loud voices in the room, not this room, but the marketing room generally, that say the self-reported attribution is a million times better than software-based attribution. And you don't need software attribution, just do self-reported attribution. And I say that that's wrong. It's not an either or, it's a yes and. Both. The ideal state is to have both, because when I have somebody that comes in and their first touch, when I'm using software-based attribution, which this is always the big reason why they don't like software-based attribution, is when somebody comes in and their first touch is direct or organic search. The question is always, well, why did you come to my website direct if that's your first touch? Or why did you search for my business and that's your first touch was organic search? That's always the first question they ask. And they say, well, self-reported attribution is better than software-based attribution because it answers that question. And my standpoint is self-reported attribution is great because it provides context. If I just have self-reported attribution, I miss that they came from direct or organic search. If I have both, I know that they came from direct or organic search, and I get the context behind how and why did they actually come to the website in the first place? Why were they searching what they were searching? Why did they type, Attributa.io into their browser for their first touch? So the two work really, really well hand in hand, but it's not an either or proposition, because as much as software-based attribution has certain flaws and gaps, like the ones we just talked about, self-reported attribution has just as many flaws and gaps as well. As we all know, humans are fallible, our memories are horrible, and people will say something that, oh, well, yeah, I heard about you from this and this, when in reality, that's not where they heard about you. They heard about you somewhere else. This is what they remember. So because both of them are fallible for different reasons and in different ways, they actually work best together, collaborating together, as opposed to in opposition with one another as an either or statement.
Yeah, I mean, we see the same thing on our side when we collect that data. Like, there's certainly the field getting filled in, and then when you reconcile against other data sources, the quantitative side, it's not even close. Like, damn well that that's not how you actually heard about us.
Oh, yeah.
But it happens online and offline, too. I can't tell you how many times that I've listened to sales calls and the sales rep says, oh, how did you hear about us? And they say some ridiculous channel that we're not even on.
Yeah.
Like, oh, or I saw you on television, or I saw you on some site that you have no involvement in, like just weird stuff that's just not true.
Yeah.
I mean, you can look at it and throw it out, of course, but I would say in like what I've actually seen, what, 25% of people actually say something that makes sense, which is good. You know, it does add that extra piece of information that sometimes you don't get out of the attribution tools. But with both, there's data that you have to take with a grain of salt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Neither solution is perfect, and there is no perfect solution. So I think that the goal is just to fill as many gaps as we can with the best data we have available. And that's the two solutions together fill more gaps with the best data. So the ideal state is to have both.
So I want to talk about the software attribution in a second, but just going back to the self-reported, one of the conversational points that I typically have and is a challenge is like, how do you scale that from a data structuring perspective, but then also how do you disseminate it effectively internally?
Yeah, how you scale it from a data standpoint is, I mean, you have to normalize it. If you have an open text field, like, you're going to get all sorts of crazy responses, and you're never going to be able to actually parse that into usable data. So you have to turn that into a pick list, which is, and the pick list needs to be representative, because James, you just mentioned that people will say channels that you're not even on. The pick list has to be representative of the channels that you're actually on. So like, if you're giving people the option of, like, you know, of radio and television, but you're not on radio and television, then you're going to get bad data. But if you're not giving people the option of radio and television because you're not on radio and television, you're not going to get the bad data. You're going to force people to be like, where did I hear this person hear about them from? It wasn't radio, because they're not even on radio. So, so you have to normalize the data. Same thing when you're asking the question in a sales call, where did you hear about us? You know, if sales just has an open text field to fill in, they're gonna put radio, even if we're not on radio. So, you know, in Salesforce or whatever CRM, they're inputting the data from the phone call. Again, that needs to be normalized to pick list data that's representative of where we're at. If you do that, then you can turn that into usable data. And then when you kind of balance that against your software-based attribution, you know, it shouldn't be that one outweighs the other or takes priority over the other. It's context-based. So here's what the software is telling us. Here's what the person's telling us. And the only time that you have conflict with data like this is when you try to use it to determine causation. I never want to use the word causation when I talk about marketing attribution, because you can never actually use data to get inside the human brain in terms of what we're doing. Because if you ask the person what caused them to search for you, again, they might say something that doesn't even make any sense. So we still don't know what caused them to come to the website, because they said radio and we aren't on radio. So I try to get causation out of the conversation entirely. Don't try to find out what caused somebody to do this thing. Just tell a story. Tell a story about their journey to becoming a customer. And if you tell a story that also, if you're just telling a story, that also resolves the whole conflict that usually comes up between sales and marketing, which is like, well, no, you didn't cause this deal. I sold it. I get all the credit. No, guys, we're not fighting over credit here. Like, there's no reason to fight over credit when all we're doing is just telling a story.
Yeah, good points. So the thing that I wanted to touch on with software attribution is the impact of cookie consents, cookies going away. Like, what does that look like both now, but also moving forward as it relates to impacting those software attribution tools and models?
Yeah, so cookie consent is a big deal, particularly in the EU, where they're a lot more concerned about privacy. When GDPR first came out, there was we saw kind of a big spike in people not accepting cookies. And then that's kind of drowned out though now. Like most people are just like, they just click the button to accept cookies because they don't want to deal with it. They're just like, whatever. They just don't have the time most of the time. There are certain industries where we see people that are more likely to block cookies. cybersecurity. Anybody that's in cybersecurity, they're going to be more interested in blocking cookies. The whole crypto industry and blockchain industry is very much against like web tracking and anything like that. So they're a lot more likely to block cookies. But the vast majority of your audiences, they don't care. They just accept cookies. They're not that picky about it. Now, as we move into a cookieless future, cookieless does not mean no more cookies. It means no more third-party cookies, which are the cookies that are tracking you on other websites. So first-party cookies, which software-based attribution is a first-party cookie. It is not a third-party cookie. They're not tracking you when you leave the website. They're tracking you only when you're on the website. And I don't think there's anybody serious in the world that is making a case that a company doesn't have the right to track somebody on their own website. Like, it would be the same thing as saying, like, you don't have the ability to put cameras on inside your jewelry store to track somebody's movements inside your jewelry store. Like, nobody's making that argument. So first party cookies aren't going anywhere. And so the cookies that attribution platforms use aren't going anywhere. They're staying because those are first party cookies. Now, that being said, there are a lot of interesting technologies that are starting to come up and pop up that are different than first party cookies. There's an interesting technology that's becoming more and more common that is it's basically digital fingerprinting is what it's called, which is essentially looking at very specific things on your browser and on your computer that create basically a digital fingerprint for you that when you come back to the website recognizes you based on your digital fingerprint. So digital fingerprinting is becoming more and more common and is something that more and more attribution platforms are looking at using. Now, that doesn't mean that digital fingerprinting doesn't come with its own kind of concerns and challenges, because it's looking inside your computer basically to basically figure out what makes you based on things like the fonts that you have installed on your computer, the type of peripherals are connected to your computer. Like, there's all sorts of things that make up your fingerprint that, again, it's a privacy concern, right? Because it's people looking at what's inside your computer. So all of them have some level of privacy concern. But I don't think first party cookies are going anywhere anytime soon, because that basically means that you can't track how people are using your own web property. And that's just, I don't think anybody's ever going to successfully make that argument.
Even right now, like third party, like they still say that they're going away, but it sounds like there's like some antitrust issues with Google right now, where if they remove third party cookies, people won't have, essentially you're limiting the competition in the space.
Yeah.
And, that also is a big issue that's just going to slow things down.
Yeah. Well, I'm not, I haven't paid super close attention to when third-party cookies are going away, but I think the date's already been moved at least once or twice.
It's ever changing.
Yeah. So who knows if they will ever actually go away or when they will. It seems like for the last 7 years, it's been like, oh, it's coming. Third-party cookies are going away anytime soon. And it's like, oh, it hasn't happened yet. So I don't know.
I want to know what your digital fingerprint looks like, James, with all your TikTok video interests.
I'm not posting a single to my own TikTok. I just I do what you do. What do we call it? You have the account for browsing purposes,
right? We're lurkers.
I guess. Yeah, lurkers.
One of my favorite things is when Dave Portnoy reads, it was on Joe Rogan. I think it was Joe Rogan and Dave Portnoy reading the terms and services for TikTok of like all the things like, oh, we can track your keystrokes.
Oh, yeah.
We can listen to you while you talk. Like,
yeah,
very interesting.
Drew, with cookie consent, I know kind of you talked about a couple of verticals and things like that, but in our experience, obviously you see a drop in data whenever that gets employed. Is there kind of a rule of thumb for brands to kind of take that into account? Like, would I expect 40% less tracked or reported if I'm looking at like GA or something like that? Is there just like a baseline rule of thumb in that regard?
Well, I don't think there's a baseline rule of thumb because every organization is going to be different because different industries and different audiences. And, if you're marketing to more of a junior level person, like a coordinator or manager, they're not going to be as, usually not as tech savvy or sophisticated as someone that's a little higher up the food chain. So I think it's always so different for each organization. I think what each organization has to do is they have to be aware of these things before they turn the button on, right? So you have to know, and you, as an organization, you should do your own analysis and evaluation of, hey, when we turn this on, what are the effects going to be? What can we expect? And that should be unique to your organization based off of research and, some calculations that you're doing. If you're going into these things and turning on cookie consent or anything, and you're going in blind and having not even thinking through how this is going to affect your business, I think you're missing some critical assessment and evaluation that you need to be doing. It just reminds me back to just goes back to like 2018, 2019. I was working with a client that was on a marketing attribution platform, and they basically did a full website redesign and relaunched their website. And two really fun things happened. First off, when they relaunched their website, somebody forgot to put the visible JavaScript on the new website. So for the first 2 weeks, the website was live. They were getting zero marketing engagement through Visible because somebody forgot to put the JavaScript on the new website. Fun, great, good times. And the next thing that happened was, their web traffic just plummeted because when you launch a new website, like organic search is affected, all that. So they didn't realize that was going to happen. So, 3 months into this, they're like, oh my God, our online traffic has gone, like it's dropped by like 60%. What's happening? This is like, they're in full on panic mode because they didn't realize this was going to happen. And so, we're doing the analysis and it wasn't until, at this point in time when their agency that did this work for them was like, this is what happens when you launch a new website. Like this happens every single client that we do this for. So like, and then like, well, when is it going to get back to its previous levels? It's like, it may never, you don't know. I mean, we killed a bunch of pages that haven't been live since, 2012 but they were still driving organic search for you, but you have now you have fewer pages. Like, so it was, and the problem was that nobody had done the analysis and the evaluation before they turned on the new website. So this just completely blindsided this client, and they were in full on panic mode. So I think you have to think through these things and understand the impact before you pull the trigger. Like figure out what's going to happen. What can we expect? But when we do this,
I mean, certainly situations that we've run into plenty of times.
I was going to say, which client of ours were you talking about there? No, I mean, seriously, I feel like website migrations was like the source of our SEO business for years.
Botched migrations.
Yeah, botched migrations come back to, I mean, we had our fair share of like mapping out redirects for who knows how long, but.
Yeah. I think you get a good point, though, Drew, because I think there's a day of reckoning coming very soon for brands, too, with the transition from GA Universal to GA4. Any thoughts, any things you want to talk about in that realm? I mean, I personally hate GA4, so.
I'm avoiding it like the plague right now for my own business. So I know it's coming. I know that I'm going to have to change over. I know I'm going to hate it. I think I've used it already. I think they like when I first signed up with GA for Attributa, they like put me right into GA4, and then I was like, no, I don't like this. I'm going back. So I think I've used GA4 now for Attributa, but I didn't like it. So I think if if brands don't have a plan because they haven't done an evaluation yet, and they don't have a plan for what they're going to do when they have to switch to GA4, and how they're going to be able to make sure that they can track the same things that they've always been able to track, then again, they're going to have it is going to be a day of reckoning when they're forced onto GA4, and suddenly they don't have the same reports and data that they're used to having, and suddenly what do we do? You got to have a plan for these things.
I also feel like GA is now starting to creep closer and closer to like more of the simplistic, like just basic level of attribution, right? When we think about like what does a marketing attribution maturity curve look like, GA is certainly not on the upward side of things, especially with GA4 and all of that. So it could be a good thing in that regard. I mean, what does that maturity curve look like from your perspective when it comes to marketing attribution?
Yeah, it's not as steep as most people think it is. So this kind of gets into like the question of like, how do you get started with attribution, and the maturity curve. People are terrified of attribution because, one, they think that they need to have pristine data, like the world's best data, to get started on attribution. And they think that it's going to be a year's worth of work to get on attribution. And it's just not. Neither of those things is the case. So the maturity curve starts when you need to start tying dollar figures to marketing activities. That's when this journey starts. The moment somebody says, well, we need to find out the ROI on this, or just putting a dollar figure to any of marketing's activities, you're in the marketing attribution journey. You started. So the maturity curve looks like, I actually have a checklist that I built on my website that is designed to help organizations understand how ready they are for attribution. And there's some very key basic things. So like the maturity curve starts with, are you using UTMs? If you're using UTMs and you're consistent and you have a halfway decent UTM strategy, like your UTMs are ready. Are you using Salesforce campaigns to track offline engagement for things like trade show attendance, webinar attendance, stuff like that? If you're doing that, you're even if it's not perfect, you can get started. Are you using the standard fields and objects in Salesforce, other than everything has to be custom? If you're using all the standard fields and objects in Salesforce, you're fine. If you've completely customized the hell out of your Salesforce, well, you do have some work to do. Most of these, but that's rare. That's incredibly rare that people customize the hell out of their Salesforce like that. Particularly organizations that are, I would say, this unsophisticated. It's rare that somebody has a super sophisticated Salesforce if they're unsophisticated in most other areas. So unless you've gotten a crazy Salesforce consultant that just did that to make sure that they had revenue for the next 5 years. So, which happens. Most of these things are very simple though. And so part of the maturity curve is just saying, look, I'm mentally and emotionally ready for this journey, even if it means we might have to make some changes to the way that we do UTMs, even if it means that we need to make some changes to the way that we leverage Salesforce campaigns, even if it means that we have to make some changes to how we leverage Salesforce in some very, very minor ways. It's just being ready for that commitment and being ready for potentially some minor tweaks and changes to things. It's not as steep of a maturity curve as most people think. And then once you get onto like a marketing attribution, like a software-based attribution platform, then the maturity curve is just becoming more sophisticated in how you're using things, right? Like all of the attribution platforms have their own internal reporting capabilities. Some of them push data back into Salesforce, so you can use Salesforce's reporting capabilities. So you start out, your maturity starts out with leveraging those reporting capabilities. Then the next step is really looking into, okay, so we're leveraging the internal capabilities of our attribution platform in Salesforce. We need to take that to the next level. because we need to do we need to build more complex relationships. We need to build different visualizations. So we're going to export everything into a data warehouse and bolt on a BI platform. Once you're doing that, then, I mean, the world is your oyster. You can organize the data. You can create all the relationships you want. You can create all the visualizations you want. You are mostly at full maturity with attribution once you're in that stage. And it really doesn't take that long to get to that stage. To get to full maturity, I mean, you might be talking a year and a half, 2 years at the most. But getting started on attribution, you do not need to have a pristine data set in Salesforce and marketing automation. A lot of the attribution platforms will actually help fix the data challenges you have. Instead of the data challenges causing more issues in attribution than attribution is adding value, they actually help fix a lot of the data problems. And if they're not fixing them, they're helping surface them and show how big these data challenges are and that we've got to solve them.
I think one of the challenges that many brands face too is like, oh, I want to measure this, this, and this. I mean, is it a reality? Is it a pipe dream? I mean, that comes back to obviously what can and can't get measured. I mean, any examples of things in those realms that you've encountered over the years?
Well, I mean, the one big thing that everybody wants to measure right now that again, if you listen to the loud voices in the rooms, is you can't measure podcasts with attribution. And I mentioned earlier about bullshit. Well, that's also bullshit because there's literally an article that I wrote that gives you the playbook about how to measure podcasts using software-based attribution. And is it a perfect solution? Absolutely not. There are some gaps and holes in the solution, but they're very small. And let's be honest, there are no perfect solutions. There's no such thing as a perfect solution. So, I would say that there are certain channels that are more difficult to measure using software-based attribution than others, but the fact that it's difficult doesn't mean it's impossible. Most of these channels that are difficult to measure are difficult from a standpoint that the folks that are saying they're impossible don't know how to measure them. So there's the argument that you can't measure dark social using attribution because you can't measure with a software-based attribution platform when you get a direct message on LinkedIn about something. Guess what? You can. I just set it up for another client. You can. Absolutely you can. There's nothing that says that you can't do this. It's I don't know how or it's difficult is not you can't. So there's so many different ways to measure these things that if you have a deep level understanding of the software, the platform that you have, and you understand the different mechanisms that it uses to create touch points or whatever engagements or whatever the heck we're calling them, you can get creative and create solutions to these things. So I think that there's so many different ways that you can build these systems that most of the things that people say are not trackable by software attribution are trackable. It's just not easy. It's not easy. And like the whole podcast thing, one of the biggest things that I swear B2B people forget some of the most basic tenets of marketing 101, which is like have an offer. Like, what are you offering? So if you don't have an offer and don't have a reason for somebody to come to your website after listening to a podcast, guess what? Nobody's going to come to your website. And yeah, it's going to be difficult to measure the impact of the podcast, but I guarantee you, if you're not using basic marketing 101 tenets, like having an offer and driving people to your website, podcasts are probably not doing much for you anyway. Because you suck at marketing. I'm sorry. But like you being bad at marketing doesn't mean that the attribution platform can't track the value of this channel. It just means you're bad at marketing. So like have some reasons for people to, go from listening to the podcast to going to your website. And then you can track that, or if the CTA, like, did we all forget about CTAs? If the CTA is to call us, great. Then how you track that is hey, how did you hear about us? Right? Like, have a CTA that's tied to the podcast and then track the CTA. This is marketing 101 stuff here. This is not complicated.
I think, James, we need to create like a digital banter quote board, and we could put up Drew's "You suck at marketing" on there.
You know what's fun? Like, so we were talking about Google Analytics before, and quite frankly, I feel like I blame Google Analytics for all of this. Like, they created this system that was free, that everybody had used for a very long time, that was this single source of truth reporting that defaulted to like, Google trained us to be the way that we are with attribution. And I feel like what we're going through right here is all of the misconceptions of you can't track that, because when people say that, I feel like what they're really saying is you can't track that in Google Analytics. Like, I feel like that's almost, at least with our client base, the piece that I think is like just like this huge barrier, because when you move to, one of the things I always say is like when it's time to graduate from Google Analytics, when somebody's in the paid media space on multiple channels, spending over $100,000 a month, like there's a certain point where you shouldn't be looking at Google Analytics anymore. And now you add in these offline channels, and this is where the value of paying for an attribution tool actually makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because it's consolidating those disparate sources, right? It's consolidating the Google Analytics data with the data that's in your CRM, with the data that's in your marketing automation platform, and it allows you to put that into one system, and then that system consolidates it. It does its transformation. It does its associations with your opportunities. And then it either, outputs that to a reporting platform or outputs that back into Salesforce so that you can see all of those things, compiled together. And I think that there's, to your point, I think people just get so locked in this box of like, well, either Google can track it or Salesforce can track it. And if neither of those two things are true, then it can't be tracked. And people forget so much about just the different ways that you can get data into systems. Getting data into Salesforce isn't just a matter of, a sales rep manually importing it or having a web form. Salesforce has a whole API that you can use to push data into it. Your marketing automation platform has an API that you can use to push data into it. You have integrations. The thing that unlocks. So I was talking about earlier the dark social stuff, right? How attribution can track dark social. The way it does that is there's a platform out there that exists that integrates with your LinkedIn, and it integrates with your marketing automation platform, and it creates custom activity records in your marketing automation platform when somebody likes, comments, shares your social media posts, and when they DM you directly on social media. It creates an activity record through the integration. You can leverage that activity record to turn that into a marketing attribution touch point. This isn't rocket science. It's finding this platform and then turning it on. So people, the refrain is that, well, if the attribution platform doesn't do it itself, then it doesn't help. Well, no, there's things that you add on. You create custom scripts to do things like you grow in your maturity. You start with the base attribution platform, and then you find where it's not seeing, where it has blind spots, and you go fix the blind spots. You go fill those with other platforms, custom work, stuff like that to fix the blind spots. And I think that people just, if it's difficult, it's impossible. That's the general refrain is that if it's difficult, it's impossible. Which in a way, if it's difficult, it usually means if it's difficult, it doesn't get done, but it doesn't mean it's impossible.
Drew, you talked a lot about everything today. If you were to kind of summarize 2 or 3 actionable takeaways for our audience, what would they be?
Yeah. So my first takeaway is tied to my CTA. See how we do this? We come full circle. Marketing 101 is the CTA. If you think that if you want to know if you're ready for attribution, there's a blog article on my website that is literally like how to tell if I'm ready for marketing attribution. And there's a literal checklist that you can download in that blog article check the boxes to see how ready you are. So if you think you might be ready for attribution, or you think you might want to start this journey, go read the blog article. There's no form. I'm not going to ask you for your email address and start marketing to you. It's completely zero commitment. Just go download the thing. Go look at the blog article, download the checklist. So number one, do that. That's how you get started. That should be your starting point. Number one, read that article and download the checklist. If you do those two things, that is super, super actionable. And that's going to get you started on the journey. So number one actionable takeaway is that. Number two is, I think that stop listening to the loud voices and start just making your own decisions about what's right for your own business. Loud voices are loud not because they're smart, they're loud because they want attention. So don't listen to the loud voices and just do what's right for your business. If you think attribution is right for your business, get started and go back to actionable takeaway number one. So I think those are the two biggest ones for me. Is just I don't know that I don't know of a single organization that exists that doesn't need attribution in some way, shape, or form. If you're, I mean, maybe you're just so flush with cash you don't care. Like, you're Apple and you've got more money than most countries on the planet do, and you don't care because you just got so much cash, then that's fine. It doesn't mean you don't need it, just means you don't care. So I think that most organizations have some level of need for attribution. So just, get started. Just take a look and see what you can do to improve your data. And sorry, one just came back into my brain. So I have this concept between incidental data collection and intentional data collection. Incidental data collection means, the data that comes in is the data that comes in. It's not intentionally designed. It's just whatever happens, happens. Intentional data collection means actually taking the time to intentionally design how you are going to create and collect data. Data collection and data creation are different. Data collection is the stuff that you collect, like on your website. Data creation is the stuff that you generate in your own systems, like your CRM and your marketing automation platform. So have an intentional design around how you collect and create data. If you don't, your data will own you and your data will suck. If you have an intentional design, you will control your data and you have a chance at having good data. Doesn't mean you're going to have good data, but you have a chance if you intentionally design it. And what I mean by that is the first thing that you can do to determine if you have an incidental data strategy or an intentional data strategy is this. Go into your CRM and run a report of just your lead source field. If you have more than 30 lead sources, you have an incidental data strategy and not an intentional data strategy. 31, 32, cool. You're fine. But if you have like 75, 150 lead sources, you have an incidental data strategy and you need to take control of it immediately. That's the first indicator. When I get a system, when I get my hands on a system and I want to see how clean a client's data is, I go right to their lead source and I just look at the number of different values.
I'm definitely doing that as soon as we get off with like 3 or 4 of our clients. I'm very curious.
Yeah.
So those are great takeaways, Drew. And thank you so much for being on today's episode. How can people connect with you either on social or on your website? How can they get in touch with you?
Yeah. And thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed the conversation. So my website's attributa.io. On LinkedIn, you can find us at Attributa, or you can find me personally. I think it's LinkedIn. I think my @ on LinkedIn is @ Drew Smith, or @ Drew Smitty, I think it is, because there's so many Drew Smiths out there, or Andrew Smiths. So it's @ Drew Smitty, I think. Let me double check. Yeah, it is. It's @ Drew Smitty.
You're right.
And then on Twitter, I'm @ Smitty Marketing. on Twitter, I talk a lot about, I talk about more than just marketing though, and marketing attribution. So you'd have to put up with like a lot of football conversation as well. So mostly about local Arizona sports teams and how bad they are, because we can't sustain any success. We can't have nice things. So that's how and where you can find me on all the socials. We're also on YouTube. I have a lot of YouTube content on there. On YouTube, it's at Attributa as well.
Perfect. Well, like I said,
our CTA.
What's our CTA?
Yeah, you have to change our exit now because we need a CTA for our podcast. That's not like, comment, and subscribe.
Visit dragon360.com if you want to learn more about our digital marketing strategies and how we can make an impact on your brand. Happy?
There you go. Love it.
All right.
Thanks, Drew. You've changed our lives.
Anyway, that all being said, Drew, thank you again for being on today. And until next time, like, subscribe, connect with us, or visit Dragon360 or Attributa.io today. All right. Talk to you guys next time.